Alan Rowland again. Last month I made a presentation, and this presentation dealt with some of the things that I saw on my recent trip down the Ohio River. And much of it was with the, shall we say, the French and Indian War. And you know, I said at that time, and I'm going to repeat myself with that, I taught history for many, many years, and this presentation is designed for those people that, those students that did take my class. Took my U.S. History 1, U.S. History 2, Western Civilization 1 class, Western Civilization 2, and today's presentation will be mostly with U.S. History 2, a little bit of Western Civilization 2. But as I started to say a few seconds ago, I firmly believe that, you know, if you're going to be an effective history teacher, you need to experience what you're teaching, not just teaching from a book. And unfortunately today we have too many history teachers that do exactly that. They teach from a book, and they've never actually experienced, you know, what they're talking about, you know, and I think that's unfortunate, you know. And I'm encouraging those teachers to instructors to get out and go visit those places that they talk about anyway. But I recently took a trip, and it included a cruise on the Great Lakes, and actually the cruise started in Toronto, which is part of the exercise here today that I'm going to talk about. And the cruise went through Lake Erie, we did Niagara Falls, on into Lake Ontario, actually it was Lake Ontario, Lake Erie, Lake Huron, and then on into Lake Superior, and it finished on Lake Michigan down in Chicago. And so I was able to come across a few little minutia things in history that I had lectured on, but I'd never actually seen. And so that's what we're going to be going into today. So let me go to my camera here, and I've tried to outline this for you so you can see the places we're talking about. And if you took my U.S. History 1 class, you'll recognize this name of Fort York. Now, York was the former name of Toronto, Canada, which is the largest city in Canada. A very, very large city, just a huge number of people there, a lot of traffic. But it's a fun place to go there. But one of the forts that we lectured about in the War of 1812 was Fort York. Now, it's named for James, Duke of York, who would later be James II, King of England. But the Americans captured this fort from the British on the 27th of April of 1813. This was in the War of 1812, of course. During that battle, Zeb Pike, many people know him as that, who supposedly was the first to sight Pike's Peak. Pike's Peak is named after him anyway, but Zebulon Pike never climbed Pike's Peak, but he was killed there. But nonetheless, here, if you go to Toronto today, you'll find the remains of Fort York, which is up at the top of the hill here. You can see this is part of it here. These are modern structures over here, modern structures over there. But they have the parking. You see actually a British flag that's up at the top there. But the fort is up here. I did not go through that fort. I was limited on time, but you can do so if you wish to do that. Here's you have to look carefully at this, but it says right here, you know, Fort York in 1793, I believe is what it is. And of course, Toronto's a really, really nice place, but you have a lot of homeless people there. And in fact, over in this area right here was a homeless camp, you know, so I was kind of having to hurry by that rather rapidly. And of course, after Fort York was taken, the city of York, as Toronto today, was burned by the Americans. And 1 year later, of course, the British retaliated, went into Washington, D.C., and they burned the capital of the United States of America there in Washington. And, of course, all of you know that. All right, now, another thing that I ran across, and this was in Cleveland, and I always lectured to my classes about Commodore Oliver Hazard Perry, who was victorious at the Battle of Lake Erie on 10th September 1813. I always told my class it was also known as Put-in Bay. And when I was in Cleveland, which the battle site, it took place on Lake Erie, not too far from Cleveland. But here we can see a fat statue here of Oliver Hazard Perry. I just happened to walk up on that statue. I thought that's kind of neat, you know. And I remember showing this book. Maybe if you're one of my students, you know, you remember this. I always had it on display. Oliver Hazard Perry, the Battle of Lake Erie. Let's see if I can find a likeness here of Oliver Hazard Perry, if I can get my book to open. And here it is, right there. Oliver Hazard Perry, the Battle of Lake Erie. And he is well known for his battle flag, and the motto on his battle flag, "Don't give up the ship." I'm sure you've heard that many times, but I always used to share this quotation with my students. This was at the conclusion of the battle, in which he sent to his senior commander, I think it was William Henry Harrison. "We have met the enemy, and they are ours." Oliver Hazard Perry died in 1819 at Trinidad and Tobago, died from yellow fever. All right, so let me move on to another slide. And another fort I always talk about in my classes, again associated with mostly with the War of 1812, was Fort Mackinac. And I mentioned in my classes here that previously it was known as Fort Michilimackinac. It's located on Mackinac Island today, built in 1780 by the United States. But as the War of 1812 broke out, it was captured by the British, Canadians, and Native Americans, who stormed the fort and took it out of the hands of the American forces. That was in July of 1812. Now, if you go to Mackinac Island, and the island itself is, if you go around the circumference of it, and I did that, and actually walked around the circumference of it, it's 8.3 miles. But if you go to the far northern side, that's where the British landed. Today they had called that place British Landing. But that's where the British came ashore there and subsequently captured the fort. You can go to it today. I did not. I looked at it from the outside. The price was something like $17 for a ticket, and I didn't feel like parting myself with $17. But you can see it on the top of the hill there, and you can see an artillery piece that's down below. That's at Mackinac Island. A very pretty place there. No cars are permitted on the island whatsoever, and so everything is like horse-drawn carriage there. So anyway, you can imagine the droppings of that. But if you look at this photograph, the top here, that's the remains here of Fort Mackinac. Now these houses are down below here. Those are modern residential houses there. So the fort is located on the top of the hill there and the high ground there at Mackinac Island. A little bit more on this. The Americans attempted unsuccessfully to retake the fort in July and August of 1814, and actually what they ended up doing is trying to make a frontal charge against the fort. That was unsuccessful. And then they went back to British Landing and came in from that direction, but once again they were not successful with that. All right, now, as part of my trip, when we stopped at Detroit, we were able to, and they provided us, this was a complimentary trip, to go to the Henry Ford Museum of American Innovation. And I'll tell you a lot more about that in just a second here, but it has just a multitude of just things that you talk about, but people just don't see. And one of the things they have there on display, you cannot sit in this, obviously, but this was the rocker that President Lincoln, Abraham Lincoln, was seated in Ford's Theater when he was shot by John Wilkes Booth. And that was on 14th April 1865. And I thought that was really, really interesting, to actually be able to see that rocker. I've been in Ford's Theater on several occasions, been up into the next to the president's booth and looked into there. But, of course, that rocker's not there. It is in the Henry Ford Museum. So anyway, that's interesting there. So I wrote the narration down here, down below this. Okay, so some of the other things that we're going to address here, and I talked about bicycles in my Western Civilization 2 class, and one of the bicycles here was known as the American Star bicycle. It was developed in the 1880s anyway, and this was not in the Henry Ford Museum. This was in the Delta County Museum up in Escanaba, Michigan. It's up in the Upper Peninsula anyway, and this is what it looks like. And I thought that was really neat. Since I talked about bicycles in the class, I wanted to show you this one. Now, this is a little bit different than the penny farthing bicycle. And if you look at this bicycle, notice here where the seat is up here. This is the front wheel. The front wheel is a small wheel. This is your steering wheel. And you're seated above the rear wheel here. Now, the penny farthing bicycle is a little different than that, because in the penny farthing bicycle, this is the front wheel and this is the back wheel. So it's all reversed. The penny farthing bicycle looks just like this, other than everything is reversed. But it was developed in the 1870s in Great Britain. And I put that there for you. Now, another thing they had in this Delta County Museum, which I thought was kind of interesting. In my U.S. History 2 class, we always mention Thomas Alva Edison, and he developed the phonograph somewhere around the year 1887. And by golly, in this museum, they did have a Thomas Edison photograph. I don't know if you can read it right here, but if you look carefully, trust me, I'm looking at it right now, it is inscribed an Edison. All right, so this was the old phonograph. It looks kind of like a gramophone, but this was the earlier type there. And I thought that was a really, really neat item to see there in that museum. All right, now I want to go back to the Henry Ford Museum of Innovation. It's located in Dearborn, Michigan. Now, Dearborn is a somewhat large town. It's outside of Detroit. It's west of Detroit, about 8 miles. It'll take you about 15 minutes from downtown Detroit to get out to Dearborn. But anyway, it's what is known as Henry Ford Museum of American Innovation. I recommend that you go there. I think the tickets are $27. It's worth that. Plan to stay the entire day. It's like going into the Smithsonian Institute. And I really, really had a great time there. And they even have like a 40-acre outdoor area there that you can see old vintage cars driving around. You can even ride on those if you wish to do so. But one of the things they had in there was the Wright Brothers Flyer. That's the name of the airplane. This was the first airplane here. First airplane. Of course, that flight took place, at Kitty Hawk, at Kill Devil Hill, Kitty Hawk. I wrote the date down for you here, 17th of December, 1903. We talked about all of that and the class there. And you can see a replica or likeness there of Orville Wright making this 59-second first flight. And, of course, that aircraft is present there. It's Flyer. I thought that was really, really interesting. Now, many of the items that they have in the Henry Ford Museum of American Innovation are these old cars, these vintage cars. And if you took my U.S. History 1 or U.S. History 2 class, we talked about the Duryea brothers, Frank and Charles Duryea. They developed their Duryea car in 1893, and the one they had on display here was this 1899 Duryea car. Excuse me. Seems like I had the same problem last time I gave this presentation. All right, but that's the old car there. Of course, this first car in America was developed in Springfield, Massachusetts. Now, I think the Duryea brothers built 13 cars. Okay, another car here was the old Ford car. Let me write it for you here, let you see what it looks like. 1896 Ford Quadricycle. Here's what it looks like. I would always show a photograph of Henry Ford driving this car and seated in there. And notice where the steering wheel is, which is just right here. Steer it like with a little rod there. Okay, another car that we had in the Henry Ford Museum. Here it is. It's got a car in the background back here, so you kind of have to block that out here. But this car was a 1903 Model A runabout. That's what it looked like. Another car. I'm very close to this car. This is the old Model T, the Ford Model T. And, of course, Ford was later selling these for $290, if you can imagine that. Came in one standard color, black. I remember this very well because when I was a little boy of about 5 years old, my daddy had one of these. It was not the family car. He just had one of those and just piddled around with it. Okay. All right, let's see what else we have. And these are some of the other things here that we'll find in the Ford Museum. Theodore Roosevelt, President Theodore Roosevelt. You can call him Colonel if you wish to do. You call him Teddy. Teddy, do not call him Teddy. It was always something that irritated me very much. You call him Theodore. TR was another name. Colonel, whatever. And, of course, during his presidency, they did have cars, but he preferred to have a carriage, and, of course, horse-drawn carriage. This carriage here was the one used by Theodore Roosevelt, President Roosevelt. It's called a broom. All right, you can see the name here. If you look carefully there, it is spelled B-R-O-U-G-H-A-M, but the pronunciation for that is broom, just like a sweeping broom. Okay, some of the other vehicles, and I love this one. This was fantastic when I saw this. But this is President Franklin Roosevelt's car, which was known as Sunshine Special. This was a presidential limo. if you look carefully at it here, let me see if I can get my pointer on it. Notice the white wheels here. If we go to the front, you can see the white wheels here. That's the car, President right there. And if you took my U.S. history course, you know that President Roosevelt did come to Jasper, Alabama. And he came to Jasper, Alabama to the funeral of William Brockman, bankhead. That funeral took place in First Methodist Church in downtown Jasper. And look right there at the rampway that was built up to the north side of the church there. And you can see Sunshine Special, which is right here. And there it is. There's the car. And then we'll go back here. And there it is again. So Jasper, Alabama has a tie to that. I like that very, very much. Okay, let's see what other interesting vehicles we have. President Dwight D. Eisenhower. This is Ike's car. They called it the Bubble Top. This is President there. And the Henry Ford Museum. All of these cars are just in a line. You just walk down the line for, about 70 yards and you just see all of these presidential cars. You think, wow, unbelievable. Okay. Also present, and this was something I was really, really looking forward to, was John F. Kennedy's limousine, John F. Kennedy's car, and the one in which he was assassinated in. His life was taken on 22nd November 1863. That car is present there, and it's just, I don't know, it's just real touching. I can remember so well. I was in the 8th grade when that assassination took place, and I was not a huge JFK fan, but in fact my family were strong Republicans, but at that time, but I just felt so sorry for John Kennedy. But President Kennedy was right here in this position here at this window. The top of the car had been removed. Now the governor of Texas, John Conley, was in this seat, and up front here was Civil Service, not Civil Service, Secret Service driver and guard for him too. But that's the actual car there. You go up and you look at the car and you just think, wow, that's where John Kennedy lost his life. Now this car, by the way, and we get into a mindset where we think, well, the president had the car and that was it. But after John F. Kennedy's death and Lyndon Baines Johnson became president, he used the same car. I know it sounds morbid. It was his car. Richard Nixon used this car. Gerald Ford used this car. So it was a presidential car, for several presidents here. Now, if we look at the back of the car, this is the president's car, and one which John Kennedy was assassinated in. And see, I didn't know this until I went up there and actually looked at this car, and I'd always seen the photographs in the Zapruder films where Jacqueline Kennedy reached out onto the trunk of the car and was assisting a Secret Service agent up to this side of the car here. And, I always questioned it. I said, how in the world did that Secret Service agent, stay with the car, when the car was speeding away 80 miles per hour there. But I want you to look at this now. See where the steps are? Had no idea that these steps were right here. And that's where the Secret Service agents could ride on the back of the car here. Now, notice here, we also have handles here. And on this side, there's a handle that is right there. So the Secret Service agent can stand here and hold on to the car handles right here while the car is moving at a very, very fast pace. I did not know that. So anyway, now look here. This is one of the photographs that I used in my class. This was just a short period of time before John Kennedy would lose his life here. Here's US 1, present here at Love Field in Dallas. Secret Service agents here outside the car. Here's President Kennedy. Here's his wife Jacqueline in the back seat. We look here in the middle seats, John Conley, governor of Texas, his wife, president here to his left. The two Secret Service drivers here that were on this side here. All right, so anyway, that is the same car. Okay, all right, let me move on with another slide. And also at this same museum is Ronald Reagan's limousine. Here's what it looks like. Anyway, all right. Now, I found this to be very, very fascinating. I always used to talk about this to my students here and everybody knows the story, so I don't need to repeat the story, because we go into it in so much depth, in the U.S. History 2 class. But Rosa Parks We all know the event took place 1st of December 1955, Montgomery, Alabama, and a Montgomery bus there, transportation service bus number 2857. 2857. And this is what it looks like. Not what it looks like, that's what it is. If you look to the side of the bus here, you can see 2857, which is right here. So this is the actual bus that Rosa Parks rode on when she was arrested on that date in the 1st of December 1955. All right, now, if we move inside the bus, and you can actually go inside the bus, if you move inside the bus, here's what it looks like. All right, now I tried to explain this to my history students, and so I'm going to briefly go through this again. Now, we've all been told a story that Rosa Parks was seated on the front row of the bus and that she refused to give up her seat to a white man. Wrong story. It's not even close with that. Now, if you look at the interior of the bus here, what you don't realize, and I didn't take a very good picture of this, but this looks like it's a front row seat here, and it is not. You have over here, there are 3 seats. There are 3 seats that are on the side of the bus. So the people that are seated here are looking towards the aisle. These 3 seats here look inward, if I'm kind of explaining myself correctly. And then you have on the opposite side over here 3 seats side by side that are facing these seats that are on the other side. All right, so you actually have 3 seats here. There are 3 seats over on this side. And then this is the 4th row of seats here, and this is the 5th row of seats, and back here is the 6th row of seats. Now, where Rosa Parks was seated was right here where Wanda is seated, right there. So Rosa Parks was actually on the 5th row. Now, this was the first row for African Americans. All the rows to the front here are reserved for white passengers. And that's the way the Montgomery Bus Authority laws were at that time. Now, the way the system worked is that if all of these rows were occupied by whites, and if they were that day, then that means that the whites moved back a row. And this is where Rosa Parks was, right here. And that's where she was seated. There were so many whites on the bus that the bus driver went back and he told Rosa Parks she was going to have to move back a row. She was going to have to move back here where the African Americans sit. And that's where Rosa Parks refused to remove herself from, right there. All right, so we all pretty much know that story there. Of course, the bus drove 3 blocks, and where it stopped, there was a policeman standing on the curb, and the bus driver stopped and just signaled the policeman and said, hey, we got a little bit of problem here. And the policeman came aboard the bus and he arrested Rosa Parks. All right, so anyway, that's a true story there. So you can actually go in there and seat yourself exactly where Rosa Parks sat. Now, this is an often seen photograph here of Rosa Parks on the bus. And actually, this is not, I don't even think it's the same bus, but this photograph was taken 1 year after, this was taken in 1956 in December, 1 year after that first incident. All right, and notice the white man that's behind her, this guy's a reporter. He's actually a UPI reporter, photographer there. All right, and that's Rosa Parks in 1956. Now, 65 years later, Rosa Parks returned to the same bus, the one that I showed you a minute ago, and now she's seated in that same seat. If you find where Wanda is here, and you can see Rosa Parks seated in that same seat there. All right, so anyway, setting the record straight, I just wanted to make sure that you were aware of that. All right, so that's kind of neat. And that's all in the Henry Ford Museum. All right, now another thing. Oh, and by the way, before I go through that, I happened to dig out this old postcard here, which is actually an advertisement for the Rosa Parks Library Museum in Montgomery, Alabama. Now, where this museum is located is where Rosa Parks was arrested in Montgomery. All right, you go through that museum if you wish to do so. I've done so. It's fine. You will have to pay for that. And they have a bus there, and here's the bus, but that is not the bus that Rosa Parks was on. This is just a vintage bus from that period of time. All right, so it's not the same bus here. All right, now another thing I found in the Henry Ford Museum was an old locomotive, And I have to be honest with you, this is a copy of it. This is a replica of it. It's called Stephenson's Rocket. And if you took my Western Civilization 2 class, we talked about George Stephenson developing Stephenson's rocket in 1829. Manchester, United Kingdom, England, it averaged 12 miles per hour. 30 miles per hour was the maximum speed. I think I gave that a little bit less than that. But anyway, that's what it looked like right there. All right, and by the way, this has nothing to do with the travel that I took, but I was walking through the streets of downtown Jasper the other day, and I've always encouraged that historical markers be established in downtown Jasper. Nobody listens to me. But anyway, I did find one. This is the only one I know of. It's in downtown Jasper, other than, it's right around the courthouse. But this is called the Dow Trading Post, and it's on 19th Street, kind of across from where Economy Cleaners is located, but right there where Town Creek runs under the bridge there. And you might want to just stop there someday and take a look at that. And I wish Jasper would just add more and more of these historical signs around the town there. I really wish they would do so. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed that presentation. A little bit longer than I wanted to make it there, but just some of the interesting things, little trivial information that I picked up that I was wanting to add to my history classes, and particularly those that have had my history classes before, and just kind of add to it a little bit. All right, thank you very much.